Hey everybody, it's Steve again. What's today? Today is Monday. Monday the what? I don't know. Let's see. Actually, have a look. Monday the 17th of November. I think I don't know, maybe next weekend. I'm driving with Karen up to her family's place in Iowa. Our house in Iowa, but we go up to see them on the holidays and stuff. If we're gone, that's pretty normal. In the past, what we used to do when we weren't in that area. So I posted some different videos this weekend of Karen and I taking a drive to New Orleans, and coffee, and we went to, we didn't go to, we found Tippy Tina's, and I don't know if you're familiar with what that is, but in New Orleans it's a bar, and when I was, I don't know, 18, 19, something like that. 20, I guess. One of those years. My brother and I, Jim, and I went there, and we just went into the bar one night and, got a beer, and we're standing there, and then somebody started, there was a piano in the room, and somebody sat down at the piano, started playing. I did a double take, and I was standing right next to the piano. And it was Greg Allman. I mean, it looked just like him. And I thought, what's the odds? We're in New Orleans, And it was Greg Allman, though, when he was really popular. I mean, the Allman Brothers have been around forever, but he had a video on MTV at the time called I Ain't No Angel. And it was interesting because it was looked just like him in the video. And he ended up singing lots of songs, but that was one of them. And then I was dead positive. I was like, holy shit. So yeah, it wasn't up on a big stage. The stage was maybe 8 or 10 inches tall, and I was standing there kind of leaning on the piano while this big MTV star was playing. That was kind of trippy. But yeah, Tippy Tina's. Let's see. We drove all over down there. Oh yeah, we went and saw a World War II museum. That was pretty awesome, as far as that kind of stuff goes. Some people are more into museums than I am, I suppose, but it was interesting. There was a lot of, and it was kind of sad actually, though, to be honest. There was a lot of stuff there, being featured that was not, was not good. A lot of people died. I grew up in a family where everybody had served, and so there were things that I heard stories about all the time growing up. But what are you gonna do? Oh, and I worked on my van yesterday. I had a damaged muffler because I ran over a shovel. I didn't see it until some car passed it, and then I'm like, holy crap. And it was a big shovel, like gravel shovel kind of a thing. And it knocked loose my muffler. The pipe came out of the other pipe kind of thing. And I tried to fix it, but it apparently didn't do a very good job. But yesterday I fixed it. So kind of spoiled now. Now it sounds like a regular normal car. So I don't know. My first job somebody brought that subject up a couple days ago. Made me think. My first actual job was when I was 10. I participated in a kind of a big group thing, and we whitewater rafted down the Mackenzie River in Oregon. And the whole point of the event was, it was free, but the point of it was that everybody that was doing it wasn't just us, it was several other boats. And we were cleaning up the river. We were pulling out trash and stuff. I mean, like an old tire and, you know, junk like that. But it was a lot of fun. And the owner of the boat and one of the big sponsors of the event thought I was a good worker, and asked if I wanted a job that summer as an assistant, where that basically I would, they had 5 cabins that they rented out right on the river. And he had a whitewater rafting business, and he asked if I wanted to help them for the summer, which basically meant, you know, living about 45 minutes away from home or so, a little over. And where I would, you know, cut up the kindling for the fireplaces of the cabins and clean them and restock them with all their stuff, you know. And then also I would ride with the guide who was the owner on a whitewater raft, all these rafting trips. And so I would sit in the very back, and one of my duties was to sit in the very back, and if anybody fell out, that I was to bail out and then help them not drown. They all had, you know, life preservers on and stuff like that. But when you're whitewater rafting in a good enough river, it's easy to get beat up by rocks and stuff like that. You can get really hurt that way. But if you knew how to do it, you could survive it. And so that was one of my jobs, is to bail out and grab people and stabilize them and stuff like that, and help them not be terrified. And so that was one of the things, fun little duties. But then otherwise it was, we would, during the whitewater raft trip, it would take about 6 hours or so. And in the middle we would stop and cook everybody a lunch, you know, and like on a campfire, you know, with stuff that was all set up, and we had a big cooler in the boat and all this kind of stuff. And so I would help do that too. So it was awesome. I got to go whitewater rafting all summer long for free, you know, and barely had to do anything to earn that. But yeah, that was my first job, and I did that for, I don't know, 2 different years, you know, 2 summers. Other than that, it was what we call bucking hay. And so when you see square bales of hay on the ground in fields and stuff, after they baled the hay up, my dad did that to our place, but after they would bale the hay up, I worked for a couple of farmers. Somebody would drive a tractor pulling a big trailer, a flat trailer, and then whoever worked for the farmer would grab those square bales and throw them up into the trailer, and somebody be up there to kind of straighten everything out to stack the hay. And we'd stack a field of bales, you know, like, probably 10 feet tall, and you know, the whole trailer, and those trailers are big, so they called that bucking hay. Bucking is throwing the bales up onto the trailers. And I also ended up moving irrigation pipe for a farmer that had to irrigate, you know, with sprinklers, his cornfields. It's funny because I went to high school in Iowa, and nobody there irrigates corn. But right across the river to Illinois, because we live right on the river, but right across the river, Illinois, they have gigantic irrigation things that are automatic. They just drive along in the field. but I don't know that they're growing hay. Or growing hay. I don't know that they're growing corn in those fields. I think it's beans or something like soybeans. But that's going to be all different now because nobody wants to buy American soybeans anymore. You know, it used to be China. Like China would buy like pretty much 75% or something like that of America's soybeans. So I don't know that. And now they're buying it from like Brazil or someplace because of Trump. So I don't know that American farmers are going to be planting soybeans that much anymore. We still use soybeans ourselves. They take corn and soybeans and run them through a factory that combines them, munches them up and combines them, and it's feed for animals. Pig feed. Iowa's a big pork producer, you know, so there's giant fields with thousands of pigs in them, and that's what they eat, is that combination of corn and soybeans. Yeah. They process it all, they munch it up really good like into sawdust, and then they combine it back together, and it sort of looks like, I don't know if you've ever seen rabbit food, but it looks like rabbit food, basically. And it has a real specific smell to it. But the funny thing is I never realized the smell of all those pig farms is, you know, pig poop. Except that that's the exact smell of their food. And I never realized it until I worked on towboats on the Mississippi River. And there was a plant called ADM, Archer Daniel Midland, that used to process corn and soybeans by the zillions of trucks that would come in and dump it off, sell it, and we would combine it and we put it on barges and things on the river and send them off to to other places to get sold. And the pig farms with the pig poop and all that would smell, as you're driving by, would smell just like their food. And my idea, and I'm going to put this out there into the universe, my idea was, why don't we put also, mint? They got those mint leaves in Oregon where I lived. That's a big thing that they grow agriculturally, is mint. And they press it. They put it in giant presses and squeeze every last little drop of juice out of the mint leaves. And then they sell it by the barrel to candy companies and things like that, and like gum, chewing gum that has like mint in it. And so my thought was, how come they don't put that in the pig food? Because their pig farms would smell so much better, and it'd probably be good for them. I reckon a lot of vitamin C, I suppose. But that's my idea. So if anybody does it after this, they don't have to owe me money. But they need to put on the side of trucks and stuff my name, because I'm the one that came up with that. I don't care if they put my name on the sides of trucks. Actually, I was wrong. I was lying. I just threw Gracie a coffee bean. I doubt she's going to eat it. I figure she's going to play with it. Okay. So yeah. I used to work on towboats for a long time, on barges and towboats. I don't know if I told anybody this, but you guys. But I've been on the Mississippi River from the Gulf of Mexico to St. Paul, Minnesota. So I've been on the entire length of the Mississippi River. Some of what I did was what's called long haul or line boats, and some of what I did was work in harbors. The first harbor I ever worked in was New Orleans Harbor. The second harbor I ever worked in was Clinton Harbor, Clinton, Iowa. And basically, they drop barges off, and you take them and spot them underneath. Like places that are filling them up with corn and soybeans and, pig food and all kinds of other products like dry glue and fertilizer chemicals and stuff like that. In St. Louis Harbor, when I worked there, it was a lot of it was coal and then liquid chemicals like caustic soda and stuff like that. A lot of iron ore, that kind of stuff too. And I worked in New Orleans Harbor, like I said. And then I worked on line boats that were all up and down the Coastal waterways. So from Pensacola, Florida, to Corpus Christi, Texas, and back and forth. And so I worked on the Mississippi River and the intercoastal waterways, and I worked for a different company, spotting barges out to like single barges out to oil rigs, and just for a little while. That was a different kind of thing. That was when I was pretty young. And then I didn't work on any of the like Missouri River or the Ohio. I really wanted to check those out, but I never got a chance. And then I moved out west and started working on the Columbia River. It's the Columbia and Snake River, actually, because we would go from around past, from Portland, Oregon, to Lewiston, Idaho, and to get to Lewiston, Idaho, you have to drive on the Snake River for a bit. So and that's the other thing, is I've made all the locks over and over again on the Mississippi River and on the Columbia too. That's a lot of fun. That's interesting. It's that is a real skill, doing the locks with barges and stuff like that. So for the deckhand, for sure. Saw an accident one time in a lock where a very experienced deckhand, who was called a mate. The guy that's out on the deck that's in charge of everybody is called the mate. And this guy is a friend of mine, and we went to high school at the same high school, but he was a few years ahead of me. He was stopping some barges. We were in a lock on the Mississippi, and they have a rope that's a special rope. It's called a lock line, and it's just made differently. It's stretchy when you're talking about all the tonnage and stuff. And the whole point would be that you have it tied off, like or looped over one of the fittings in the lock itself. And as the pilot of the boat is driving barges in or like downriver, upriver, but to the lock, the person that's at the very front of the barges will will tie off and then throw a loop around, which is called a bight, around. A loop around and get at least 2 bites. And then when he's slowing the barges down, you got to be really careful that the line, which is this big around, doesn't freeze up, doesn't lock itself, because then it can explode. A lot of tonnage involved in that, and you're working against the momentum of the barges. Anyway, I saw an accident where that he was doing his normal thing, slowing the barges down, and all of a sudden, I don't know if he wasn't paying attention or what, but all of a sudden, the line locked up for a second, and then it all of a sudden let go, and it pulled his arm out of the socket in a blink of an eye. I mean, I actually didn't. I was looking right at him, and I didn't see it. I heard boom, and I must have blinked my eyes or something in a blink of an eye, because one minute he's a big fella, and so one minute he was standing there doing this stuff, and the next second his arm was hanging down, the arm that he had using his right arm, using the line. The next second his arm was hanging down the back of his back, like a backpack almost. It was completely out of the socket and loose, like, I don't know how bad it hurt him, because it looked much worse than a regular dislocated shoulder. And and a bunch of us, I was the first one there to help him and stuff like that, because he was out of it, in shock. and also I saw some when they link all these barges together for a tow is what it's called. It's a group of barges together. When they link them all together, they have to be absolutely rigid. They can't move against each other. You know, when the boat's steering it, they all have to move it as in unison. So they're all linked together with cables, 1-inch cables or so, or a little bit smaller, tiny bit smaller than 1 inch, but not by much. And then so they have like 3 tools. So they got the wires, which are the cables, and they've got ratchets, and then you've got can't even think of what they're called now, brain freeze, but it's a loop of wire and like 4 or 5 big chain links, and you use all those 3 things together to make a wire really, really tight, and if you arrange them correctly, like crisscross from different deck fittings on the barges, you can make a barge pulled in together so well to the next barge that it's like they're welded, if you do it correctly. And I've seen stuff happen where a wire breaks, and I was in the military before that, and it's just like watching a hand grenade go off. It's very deadly, and that's the kind of thing that kills people, But I've always been really lucky, and it never happened when I was anywhere near. Yeah, towboating is fun. It's the only bad thing is it's 12 hours a day. There's no such thing as less. I have never heard of a towboat company, that pushes barges on any river that works less than 12 hours a day. Even on line boats, you work 6 hours and then you sleep 6 hours, or you're off at least. It's up to you whether you sleep or not. And then you work 6 hours and you're on for 6 hours. You do this for 30 days at a time, and then you get time off at home. Like a couple weeks. And these days, like it's 2025 right now, and deckhands make around $380 a day. So it's not a bad job. It's dangerous and lonely. You're not going to see your family for 30 days at a time. And even when you work in the harbor, you're going home every day, but you're working 12 hours a day. So it's straight 12 hours. And then you go home and you come back the next 12 hours from then every day. For mine was, when I worked in the harbor, most of the time it was 7 days on, 3 days off. So not an easy job. And there's I never realized it before I started doing it, but there's no laws out there about labor. It's a rule that they enacted since World War II, where that the Wage and Labor Board, the things that govern everybody else's labor in America, does not apply on navigable waterways. So captains, pilots, deckhands and stuff, there's no such thing as overtime law. There's no such thing as, any labor laws. And it's because it's supposed to be such a critical job for America, because of all the commodities they move and all that kind of stuff. There's no such thing as being able to go on strike, that kind of stuff. You're not protected in any way, shape, or form from that. There are unions and stuff, but there's some crazy things that the companies do to make sure unions can't even start. One time we were going through a lock, and a union guy, like an organizer, came out to the lock and took a box and went like this, a bazillion little pamphlets about, union stuff. And the captain called out on the loudspeaker and said, "Anybody touches any of that stuff, you're fired." And then yelled at the mate to go out there with a push broom and to push it all into the water. That was fun. Interesting. Towboats are some of the biggest polluters anywhere. I'm assuming ships are too. I never served on a ship or anything like that. You know, in America they got the Navy, but then they also have like Coast Guard, and they also have Merchant Marine, and that's all on the ocean stuff. I did everything you can do just about on towboats. I worked on a fuel barge, which is just a floating gas station. I worked on lots of chemical barges where we're just transporting and nobody's using any of that stuff. One of the chemical barges I worked on, which is, you know, several times, but was corn whiskey, corn alcohol, like moonshine, but professionally made. Hi, Gracie. I know, kid. And we got that from ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, where that they process corn and soybeans and stuff there, and so it's funny that they had ATF guys out there and all this other kind of stuff, and they're just very, very strict about every little bit of movement and security and stuff with those barges. So it's got a regular size. It's a I don't know how many gallons they hold, but the barges are 35 feet wide by like 200 feet long, and then the inside of the barge isn't just, you know, the hull. They're double skinned, which means that there's what's called a hopper. There's the hull outside that you can see, but then there's about 1.5 feet of space, or 2 foot of space, between the hull itself and then the inside tank. On chemical barges, the liquid things, it's a tank within a tank, sort of, you know. And it even is about 2 feet from the bottom, like 1.5 feet from the bottom. There's another, you know, the bottom of the tank, and then there's the bottom of the barge, which is funny because it happens all the time. Things get hit, wing dams and stuff in the river, where it'll put a split in the barge, and it's leaking, right? And we keep it pumped out. There's one of the biggest things that deckhands do is keep barges afloat. So we've got, you know, hatch covers everywhere on the top of on the deck of the barge, and they're using a pump that you know, it looks like a lawnmower engine. It's got a pump attached to it, and some unlucky deckhand, which they always get the shit jobs, and I was always a deckhand. I never wanted to be anything but a deckhand. You know, I had a company that wanted to make me a pilot, and I should have, because it's a lot more money. But I wanted to be a deckhand. That was the fun part to me. And so a deckhand would get chosen, not joking. You would take a bunch of shingles. They would buy wooden shingles that are supposed to go on a roof of a house, old houses, you know, old time. And the deckhand would take a hammer with them, or it's a little hatchet with a hammer on one side and a little hatchet on the other. It's meant to split shingles. Would take a bundle of shingles, not a full bundle, just a few, and this hatchet, hammer, down with them, climb down a ladder that goes into the what's called void tanks, and so somewhere in the middle, and you kind of figure out where it is eventually, underneath the big hopper or the big tank, there's a leak. And if you're having to keep it pumped out, that's obviously a leak. So the deckhand's job, one of his jobs, is to find that leak. And the barge is 35 feet wide, and so about 30 of that is the hopper, okay? So there's 1.5 feet of space between the hull and the hopper. And so the deckhand has to low crawl underneath. This is what's called confined space working. Yeah, void tanks are confined space already, you know. You have to literally, before you can go down there, you have to use a device we call a sniffer, and it detects gases or a lack of oxygen. That kind of stuff before you can go down, because it can kill you. And it happens all the time. Not as much these days, you know, in the 90s when I was doing it, but not as much then because we had technology. But like sniffers. And you'd climb down the ladder. You'd have to lay on the bottom of on the hull, the bottom of the barge, and low crawl underneath this thing. And I was never a little man, so I was about 6 feet tall. Always been about 6 feet tall, and about 220 pounds. Okay, so I was great for lifting stuff. Not quite as awesome for crawling underneath stuff. So I barely fit. It was like spelunking. It never bothered me. Some guys were claustrophobic and stuff like that, or they were scared of the water. The idea was you're always crawling in around 6 inches of water or so when you're doing that, because you got pumps going, but they can't pump it all out. So you're crawling around in about 6 inches of water, and you got about a foot between that top of that water to the top of the thing that's over your head. So when you're crawling, your face is in the water, your body's all in the water, that kind of thing. And you find that leak with your hands, and you start taking those shingles, and you start, the leak is always like a split, okay? So it's just a crack, basically, a good sized crack. And you start filling that crack with these wooden shingles. And, as you get them pretty tight in there, and as they're all very, very dry. And so as they get exposed to the water, they swell some. And so that's how you can stop a leak that way from the inside. There were occasions when a leak was so severe, like a big gaping hole from hitting a bridge or some shit like that, which is more common than you think. You would literally get the mattresses or a mattress or something out of the boat where the guys sleep, and you would tie small line to it, and then you would toss the mattress overboard to go in front of the hole. And as the water's flowing into the barge, the pressure of doing that would squish that mattress up against the hole. And so to help the flow of water stop, or to help seal it rather, you would wrap that mattress in a blue tarp. It wouldn't protect the mattress. Mattress would be ruined after that, but sometimes holes are big enough to where you had to use a mattress on the outside of the barge. And so you throw that over, with those small lines, you tie it off on a deck fitting, and then you just keep pumping out the barge. You'd have 4 or 5 pumps going at the same time. Each one of them are about around 100 pounds, 80 to 100 pounds. And so you carry those out from the boat. And then after that, a deckhand's job is just to make sure that there's always gas in the pumps, so they'll keep working. Deckhanding is one of the hardest jobs I've ever had. Not the hardest, but a hard job. Anybody that's ever done it before, that is listening to this, you'll know all about rig and swaps. That's a whole ball game. The apparatus I told you about that link barges together, it's a ratchet. And a ratchet is about 5 feet long, 4 or 5 feet long. I don't know what they weigh, about 80 to 100 pounds. And then a wire, which is a 1 inch or a little less in diameter, 35 feet long. And then I'm having a brain freeze about that one last piece, the name of it. But anyway, it's a loop, a wire, a cable loop, and it's like joined together, right? It's about the size of a hula hoop, and it's got like 5 links, big links coming off of it, all attached to each other. And that's so that you can, one end of the ratchet, which has a big hook, you can link that to that, and it goes on a deck fitting. And the other end of the ratchet goes to each one of those cables that's 35 feet long. It has an eye in it also. and that's been pressed in it by a machine the whole bit. And the other end of the ratchet goes to one of those eyes, and the other eye is something you attach to a deck fitting, like a cleat, a gigantic cleat, and then you just sort of you weave these, like into like a figure eight kind of a thing or something like that. And as you tighten this ratchet, it's you can go online, Google it, a ratchet, whatever is. They'll try to show you what a ratchet is for a mechanic, but then you might get lucky enough to see a ratchet so that it's got this little crank thing, and it's got a what's called a dog on it, and it goes click, 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 and then you tighten. So back and forth, back and forth. So you stick these steel rods in it. They're called toothpicks, so that they can't twist the wrong way. The each end, the hooks, and then you tighten this handle. And all deckhands carry what they call a set of tools, which is 2 toothpicks and a cheater, which is about a 5-foot pipe with a flared end, and the flared end is for the ratchet handle. And one of the nice things about being a big guy is that you can put a lot of ass behind when you're tightening those ratchets, and it can really bring two barges, which are I'm getting hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tons in my belief. I mean, I don't know, they're all steel, and 35 feet wide by 200 feet long. That's a lot of steel. And so when you're manipulating that stuff to make it secure and stuff, those wires, those sets of rigging, and that is a set, a ratchet, a wire, and I'll remember the other part at some point when I don't need to know. But anyway, that's how that works. And so rig and swaps are when a line boat pulls up to a harbor and the harbor already has a tow that's already built. There has to be so many sets of those on that tow so that the tow is secure. All the barges are locked together and they can't move no matter what. And then that line boat, though, owes that harbor boat all that rigging. That's, thousands of dollars worth of rigging. So every single time a line boat picks up a tow from a harbor boat, the deckhands all have to do what's called a rig and swap. So both the mates go out there and count how many pieces of rigging, how many sets of rigging is on a tow, and then they each carry this giant organized piles of all this stuff, and so then all the deckhands get together and start taking, and everybody's counting, and the mates are counting and all that. And so in a deckhand's life, it's easy to do a big rig and swap once a day, easy. And there's often smaller rig and swaps too, but yeah. So the life of a deckhand is a tough, job. It's not a huge amount of really fine, you don't have to be a mathematician, but you have to be a worker, for sure. I don't know of too many jobs that are more labor intensive than that. So what else? So I was doing a video the other day, and my wife got home for lunch or something like that, and I had to stop all of a sudden because I like to hang out with her, and I don't like to have anybody around when I'm recording my videos, which is really funny. But I was telling this story. I'll just continue it now. So I was talking to this fella who was an old family friend and was my dad's handler. and we didn't know, and nobody told us anything. And maybe I got done with that actually. Yeah, my dad got out of the Navy, and then we went, I don't know, almost 2 decades before he passed away at 50 years old of a heart attack. So I mean, there was no warning. But in all that time, he never told my mom or anything that he was a really high security clearance courier for the U.S. Navy, where that whenever he would come home, it would totally be at a different schedule than all the rest of the guys in the boat. He would get home with an envelope, and his job was to report right back, because we were in Virginia at Norfolk Navy Base, and so his job was to go straight from there to Washington D.C. and hand the Chief of Naval Operations an envelope, and so that was there. There was no link between the boat and the CNO, other than this one person. That's the best way to do security. And the person, my dad, was totally undercover because, at that time the Russians were on us, and every government really, even Allied governments were on us, but not as bad as the Russians. I mean, they would kill a person if they thought they needed something, a piece of information that the person had or whatever. But the other way to do it, instead of have somebody be under big time armed guard and all that kind of stuff, would be to make sure that nobody knew it was him. He was just an ice seaman. He was an enlisted man. He wasn't an officer. And it wasn't obvious what he was doing. He wasn't carrying a briefcase handcuffed to him or anything like that. He was carrying a duffel bag, and inside the duffel bag there was an envelope of information that was very, very, very secure. Whatever that information would be, I don't know. But it's almost always concerning a Russian sub. My dad he told me one time that they had spent a week or 2 weeks sitting on the bottom, on the ocean bottom, watching a Chinese harbor, and they would listen. They couldn't see anything ever, but the guys that sat there and listened to all the sound outside the boat could tell. They had it down as to what vessel it was and everything like that. One of the biggest things of their job was to literally memorize the sound of each and every vessel coming in and out, or just going. And they could tell you, if it was Chinese, they could tell you what boat it was, everything. And so they sat at, and that was before computerized stuff, which is digital now. And I'm not going to tell anything about submarines, just because, not really, because it's still, so that was telling me it was 45 minutes, or almost. Yeah, almost. But anyway, in the 60s, they were paying attention to what the Chinese were doing, also, and of course the Russians. The whole plan was somebody's following those guys before satellite communication was what it is now, and we had listening posts on the bottom of the ocean over the entire world, and so when they could hear the certain boats going by, they would again have some of those listening guys, all very analog. The human brain was by far the most powerful at that time. And when they're sitting at the bottom of the ocean, just outside of a Russian harbor or a Chinese harbor, they'd be able to say, well, that boat and that boat and that boat left at this time. And then when all these sensors all over the world on the ocean bottom would hear something go by again, they would have those people listen to those sounds and say, yeah, that's this boat. Now, we know where they were on this day, then we knew where they were on this day, and they can kind of track them all around the world that way. And that was the old way to do it. Now it's totally different. But they were doing that. That way they knew, they always knew where everybody's subs were. You know, the goal being, if they don't know where somebody is, that means they could be on our doorstep. They could be right off New York. They could be right off of Los Angeles. You know, and the concern with that is, at the time, submarines were the best launcher of nuclear warheads at the time because you never knew where they were. But that's how they tracked where they would be. And if possible, would be to have one-on-one, meaning just like watching a football game. You know, if there was a Russian sub or a Chinese sub that we were worried about, which the Chinese didn't have anything we were worried about at the time. If you knew where they were, you'd follow them. We followed the Russians all the time, and they followed us. And that way, they always knew where they were. If anybody decided to get too close to the United States, because a missile that they launched out of a submarine couldn't travel across the entire world, right? But they could get within range, and then we'd know. And then there was an alert that if they ever started doing something they shouldn't do, like basically surfacing, or not surfacing, but getting close enough to the surface to launch a missile or whatever. I mean, this American sub would be watching them carefully and get into perfect position. If they had to kill it, they would. The whole point. The only bad thing in the Navy was when you lost track of a sub that was potentially one of those that could wipe out the country, kind of thing. Because then they don't know where they're at and they don't know what they're doing. Well, now we've got so much very sophisticated stuff up in the air, up in the sky, and down on the ocean floors that we always know where they are at. Always. And when somebody's doing something that's interesting or different, maybe experimenting different equipment and stuff like this, there's an American sub or two or three near them, so that they're all really paying good attention. American subs are so advanced now, and it's, back in the 60s, they were really advanced for their time. Okay, Russians had probably shit that was more advanced than us in a lot of cases. They used to have a really smart program, as good as that they could possibly make it under their system government. They've lost all that now. They make really dumb decisions now and stuff, and they waste money like crazy. They can instead be using that money to improve their equipment, improve their technologies. I don't even think they go to space anymore. Which the oceans are really important for the individual security of your submarine, of your country. But space is going to be the next thing, big time. The Chinese right now are really going for it. They're really doing stuff, and I'm so proud of that they are, because that's it's nothing to do with a country, them or us kind of a thing and stuff. The human species, the Earth type human species, really needs to be doing that, because we're only on the the head of a pin is the Earth. Everything else around us is just never-ending amounts of space for people to live, and resources like all the different minerals and da-da-da-da. I mean, Mars is bigger than Earth, and it's untapped. The moon is untapped. Nobody's mining any of that stuff. Because of Earth's gravity, we have such a difficult time getting off of the Earth that what they need to do, and I've been saying this ever since I was a kid when I used to think about it, was that they need to build bases on the moon, because getting off the moon is not as hard as getting off the Earth. Not near as hard. And there's everything on the moon that you need to build stuff, to like build a factory, say. All living, and I still don't understand this, but all living space should be underground. That as construction goes and stuff, you could make all that stuff 100% secure, like airtight, that kind of stuff. It could be it could shield you from the radiation from the sun if you were, 100 feet underground. And all the stuff needed up there for the electricity, which is like solar, the moon has water underneath its surface, in patches and stuff like that, which is well understood now. All those things are there. It's just a question of getting up there and bringing some equipment. After that, they can make concrete of their own. They can make steel of their own if they need. Most of the steel has to be made down here, though, because there wouldn't be any. It would take a lot to build smelters and stuff there. But you can make fuel out of the water that's there, even out of the soil. They separate molecules and harvest like hydrogen molecules and stuff like that from the water, but also from different types of soil. So anyway, that. Eventually, when we get our heads out of our butts, or if AI takes over and decides that that's what we're going to do, the reality is, though, of course, AI is going to be much less interested in space travel than we are. The only reason we ever even started messing around with space travel in the 60s was because we were trying to one-up the Russians. We were competing for popularity, and power and stuff like that. Well, AI is not going to give a crap about that. AI would be interested in that kind of stuff if it decided that there was a reason to have us being multiplanetary. Musk, one of his reasons is that to hedge our bets, which basically means if a planet killing, and it's inevitable, one day it will happen, but if a planet killing meteorite hits us one day, when I'm saying we could be hit by something that's traveling, at the speed of light, and is, the size of New York City or something like that. That could destroy everything on the planet, all life, that kind of stuff. The meteorite that hit the Earth and that killed all the dinosaurs. Some people believe, when I say people, I mean scientists, believe that it was one huge one that made the Gulf of Mexico. The shape, and all that, it might be a big crater. And then also, some people think that it was a storm of meteorites that, the Milky Way that surrounds us is a meteor field. It's and just like anything else, they're floating in no gravity, right? They're just floating. And if something comes in and hits one, that one hits 10, and then, that kind of stuff. Things get knocked out off course, and they start speeding up, and they go faster and faster and faster as they go because of other planetary gravities that affects them from long distance sometimes. But anyway, something like that, a storm of meteorites hit the Earth at one time. And they believe it's possible that that's what killed the dinosaurs. Like, it was like meteorite after meteorite after meteorite that hit the Earth, damaging more and more and more. And it didn't kill all of them. So it didn't kill all life by any means. In fact, one of the extinction events that happened on the Earth, there's been 4, I think, was nothing to do with a meteorite. It was algae. And so apparently the Earth got too green. There's a big jungle, head to toe everywhere, on the poles everywhere. And algae blooms in the ocean basically sucked up all the air, all the oxygen, and stuff, and made the Earth toxic to other life forms. That's one of the things that they believe is one of the extinction events. Humans are making sure that's not going to ever happen again, though. We're trying to make sure that there's no life possible on Earth. Joke. But the biggest danger is meteorites, giant meteorites. So to make us multiplanetary, which is, it's really what you'd call thinking down the road, planning. It's trying to make sure that human species survives everything and anything. If the Earth ever got hit by a big meteorite, then if we're also on Mars and if we're also on the moon and all these different things, then yeah, some of us gets killed, some of us don't, but there's enough to keep going, right? And that's the belief. So the only way that the super AI, when it finally does take over, it's not going to be a bad thing. It's going to be heaven, because it will exercise its ability to fix everything. All the pollution that we have, all the pollution problems we have, any lack of resource whatsoever that we have, lack of space, lack of living space, you know what I mean? Pollutions in the oceans, pollutions in the rivers, and just all the air and all that kind of stuff. All of it can be fixed. Every bit of it can be fixed pretty easily, and with the tech we have right now. But greedy people don't want to part with the money. They want to monetize everything, that they can get their hands on. And, AI won't care about that. It's not about money. And so that's going to be awesome. One of these days I should write a real paper on all the things that I think AI will change. I think some things we're so used to seeing some things. I think some things are going to be a surprise to us. I think it was that same teacher that and I could swear it was an anthropology class. I'm not ultra positive. I think that it was. And the thing is, I don't remember how all this linked to anthropology necessarily, but it did apparently, because that was his entire class. Where that, he was saying that the having electricity available to us, is something that has created generations of people that don't know anything about not having electricity. The things we take for granted, right? Kids take TV and computers for granted, cell phones and things like that. I grew up in a time with no cell phones. I grew up in a time with no computers, no PCs anyway. And so I know what it's like to not have a cell phone. I know what it's like to, to not have instant communication everywhere you go. And it was interesting sitting in this. He was like thinking, he was saying that, imagine what your grandparents or great grandparents' lives must have been like when they didn't have refrigerators. And I was thinking about that. Wow, I've never not had a time in my life when I was a kid, and stuff like that, where I didn't have a refrigerator. It's like camping, But imagine you don't have a refrigerator and nobody you knows has a refrigerator. You've got this box that somebody built it's like a thick insulated box that the door, when you close it, seals just like a refrigerator. But the only way to keep stuff cold in there is that somebody delivers you ice. There was entire industry in creating and maintaining ice. They would travel from places way up north, where with frozen lakes and shit like that, and they would cut ice and then haul it almost like a trucker, but wagons, whatever. And they would, dig a big giant hole, build a building in it, and then keep that ice down there for as long as they could, That's a trip. I can't even really picture that. But it's all about what you get used to. And whenever a piece of technology is introduced, eventually it's going to be something that everybody takes for granted. A washing machine, a washer and dryer. When I was a little kid, you used to always see, in every backyard had a clothesline. And people that had apartments, they had these clotheslines that was between your building and another building, and they'd be on a pulley so that you could pull your stuff in and unclip it, and so the people across the way would get to use it also outside of a window, and that's just how you dried your clothes. And washing was, they had a washboard, which is either wood or metal, that had these little ripples in it, and they would take a bar of soap, which was especially just for clothes washing, and they would scrub it in a bucket with water and scrub on the clothes, put the soap down, and then start taking the clothes and rubbing it up against the washboard, basically to agitate the clothes and get the soil and stuff out. And then they had a rinse bucket, and then they hung it on the line. Now we're all used to having a machine. At my house in Iowa, we have one machine that does the washing and drying. So you put your clothes in there, you put the detergent in a drawer, plop it in or whatever. Or we had pods, so we just threw it in there with it in the machine with the clothes. You put your fabric softener, if you're using it that way, in this drawer, close that, and you started the machine, and it would wash, and it was one of those tumble around like this. It would wash the clothes, then it would drain it all out, and then it would dry the clothes, and it would go off when your clothes are done. And now it wouldn't just stop. Once the clothes were dry, it would every few seconds turn it over, so the clothes would fall and move and stuff like that. So that way nothing just got wrinkled. And you just had to make sure not to overfill it, because then the clothes wouldn't have enough room to really not be wrinkled up. But it would do that for 12 hours. Anytime you could, if you went to work, you'd come home and then take your stuff out of the machine and fold it up, and you're good to go. The very next step is going to be robots doing your shit for you. It sounds crazy, because back in the day, nobody knew anybody that didn't hand wash their clothes. You might have been rich enough to pay somebody to do it back when, prior to 1870, a lot of people in America had slaves. Not necessarily black slaves. A lot of people had Irish slaves. They were called indentured servants, slaves. So there's a lot of people that didn't do their own wash if they could afford it. But if you couldn't afford a lot of shit, you did your own wash. You hand washed everything. And I bet you there was a lot of people that stunk to high heaven because they just didn't bother. Boy, I don't like stink. I really don't like stink, so I'm really glad that we have deodorant and showers where it's easy to take a bath every dang day. And where that I'm spoiled in my lifetime compared to my great grandfather, But the next step, if you'd have told them one day that nobody's going to stink unless they're just an asshole and don't bother to use deodorant, imagine how smelly that would have been. Holy moly. But anyway, if you'd have told my great-grandparents about this thing where that you just take your clothes off from that day, throw it in a machine, throw a little pod of something, soap inside of it, in there, as long as you can keep it away from your 12-year-old that wants to eat it, and wash, just push a button and it washes it and dries it, and then you take it out and fold it up and put it away. They'd have thought they just would have had a hard time wrapping their heads around that. Well, in a few generations, people won't do shit. It'll be robots. They already got robots to vacuum the floor and mop the floor too. But we still have to have the labor of once in a while emptying out the robot's garbage can where they leave all the junk from the floors. In a few generations, though, supposedly 2027 to 2025 now is when the new AI is going to wake up, the better AI. it'll happen immediately after that. It'll start to build all kinds of robots to basically take whatever it thinks up and turn it into a reality with their hands, or whatever you have for hands. But in a few generations, people will not know what it was like to do their own work anymore. You know, just like now we have a washer and dryer, and refrigerators and cell phones and all those different things. In no time flat, it's going to be a thing where that, you know, we'll have machines all over that don't have any emotions. They know how to do their job. They've got a job, and we've got other robots to maintain those robots, you know, and all that. I mean, I'm not going to be around for it, but that's another thing we've been working on as a species, you know, for at least thousands of years, I would say, but at least hundreds of years, and to great end. We've lengthened our life expectancy as long as we don't eat what greedy people are trying to feed us to cut that back. You know, they don't want us to live too long, because there's a point to which we're no longer productive. We're no longer going to be able to work for them and stuff like that. But other people are working on things that help us live longer and better, you know. Years and years ago, in the 90s, I believe, two scientists came out with this stuff called resveratrol. Now, since then, it was never patented. There's a zillion, if you look up resveratrol, there's a zillion products out there now that are not resveratrol, but they claim to be. The way you can find out about this, it was on 60 Minutes. If you look up 60 Minutes resveratrol, it'll do this really interesting show that you'll see, where these two scientists came up with this thing that they experimented with rats, and they were able to make the rats live 30% longer with more energy the entire time. The exact same thing is translatable to humans, but then I gotta go.